till that 8 years after JFK's assassination, Jackie Kennedy avoided the public unveiling of their White House portraits, but the Nixons graciously agreed to a secret, private tour for her and her kids. It was her only return visit. I imagine it would have been a very painful experience and no need to have the press involved. She literally had a front row seat to her husband's head being blown apart. I find her quite interesting. She was revered for her looks and dress sense, and yet to me she wasn't a conventionally beautiful woman. If I watch videos of her speaking, she has this slow, deliberate way of talking. Like someone mentioned, a showpiece. Yet, she sat next to the president when he was shot and carried part of his brain matter in her hand, which she actually handed over to the doctor. She stayed in that blood-gore-stained suit, so that they could see what they had done to her husband, no crying, and remained in the hospital until the autopsy was completed. Apparently there are some reports that say, that even in the car, when he was shot, she said something like, "What are they doing to you?" That gives the impression that she knew he had enemies and that they had been discussed. So for all the showpiece qualities, she actually had a spine of steel, and showed some real grit in how she faced the world in the immediate aftermath. Consider also that just a few months before this, she had lost her baby. This woman was no snowflake. Having to be the perfect wife and showpiece while your husband is famous as a serial cheater. Then he dies tragically. There's some conflicted feelings. Maybe it was a political marriage and maybe they had agreed on behavior. It's good she made a boundary. The Kennedy family as a whole has a curse of death. Joseph Kennedy died in a plane crash. Kathleen Kennedy died in a plane crash. Edward Kennedy barely survives a plane crash. Rosemary Kennedy had a failed lobotomy and was put in an institution. John F. Kennedy is assassinated. Robert F. Kennedy is assassinated. Edward Kennedy drives off a bridge. David Kennedy dies of overdose. Michael Kennedy dies in ski accident. John F. Kennedy Jr., his wife, and sister-in-law all die in a plane crash. Mary Kennedy is found dead in a barn by suicide. Maeve Kennedy and her 8-year-old son drowned. Saoirse Kennedy died of overdose. If I was a Kennedy, I would avoid planes at all costs. Ted Kennedy's drive off a bridge was a bit worse for his passenger than it was for him, though. Well, Nixon believed his whole life that LBJ was the mastermind behind JFK's assassination. He also worked with Kennedy when the two were both young first-term congressmen. That's crazy. Everyone knows it was the Bush family. Isn't the most widely believed conspiracy theory that the Mafia and the CIA did it? Mrs. Kennedy also expressed her sincere thanks in a warm note written to Mrs. Nixon. "The day I always adored it turned out to be one of the most precious ones I spent with my children." How incredibly sad. The Washington Post ran a story about this on the 50th anniversary of the visit. Despite being opponents in the 1960 presidential election, JFK and Richard Nixon had been close friends since the 1940s. Such class and civility. No matter the political differences, I've always liked seeing how the current president and the former presidents all like each other and treat their families as their own. Even between presidential candidates there is a kinship and mutual respect, pre-2016 election of course. There is a clip of Mitt Romney giving his consolation speech and people boo when he says Obama won, but he tells them to stop booing and that the country chose him and he believes he will do his best. Politics has always been a shitshow, but at least it was our shitshow. I don't know what is going on right now. I'm currently listening to Obama's new memoir, and I really like the section during the Bush-Obama transition. While it's clear they have political differences, Obama has nothing but good things to say about the man on a personal level. I particularly like the part where they are riding in the presidential limo on the way to the inauguration, where Obama is shitting his pants nervous, while Bush is enthusiastically telling him about clearing brush on his ranch in Texas. Exclude Trump from their lull. A little-known fact about JFK's presidential portrait is that it wasn't commissioned until after he was assassinated. His official portrait has him looking down towards the ground, while all other presidential portraits have the presidents looking straight ahead, towards the viewer. Jackie apparently requested a different pose than other presidents, and the painter based it on an image of Ted Kennedy at the graveside of JFK. And LBJ would constantly call her and make her laugh and really treated her like family. She really seemed like an incredibly sweet and gentle person who went through too much. I listened to a few other of their calls and JFK didn't really treat her well, but she also is fond of some of their memories. Nixon was an odd duck to say the least. He could be very vile in his comments and take glee of others' misfortune. Then, in another instance, be very gracious and kind to the same person. He hated the Kennedys and was joyful when Ted Kennedy's car went off the bridge. Then he invited Kennedy to the White House and personally spoke to him how to deal with a press that maligned him in a very soulful manner. In his tapes he spoke of blacks being inferior, but actually integrated our public school system because he believed in doing it. He also created the EOC. He railed against Jews but had Kissinger as his Secretary of State. He also made sure Israel won the war in 1973. He was two people. One was gracious, extremely intelligent and took the long broad view of humanity with optimism. The other was petty, spiteful and self-destructive. Both of these seemed to function at the same time. It's why historians can never really seem to figure him out. He also started the EPA and he wanted his legacy to be a British-style National Health Service. President Nixon wasn't the devil, not an angel, just like every person who has held the office, wildly flawed. I got teary-eyed reading this article. There's something about the raw pain and emotion being expressed in handwritten letters, plus the old-fashioned civility of two families from different political parties being kind to each other. Pat Nixon was a gracious and kind person and may have arranged the private viewing for her, which may have had an effect on Jackie's willingness to re-enter the White House. Despite all the problems of her husband, she was a good first lady and should be remembered as such. Apparently the Nixons are actually well respected among presidential families. Helped future presidents out after he left office. I'm currently reading Burning Down the House about how Newt Gingrich was instrumental in reshaping partisanship in American politics. I think what most people don't realize is that especially before the Reagan Revolution, Democrats and Republicans saw each other as colleagues and despite professional differences got along well. Is anything known about how she was after? That's PTSD material right there. I'd never really thought about it before. She has got to be one of the strongest women in history. All that her and that entire family dealt with and went through, geez. I've always wondered how often presidents and their family return. Never knew this. Interesting. Out of curiosity, do living first ladies usually attend presidential inaugurations if their husbands have since passed? For example, was Nancy Reagan at Obama's 2008 inauguration, being the first one that Ronald was not alive for? Man, what a different time we are in. As shit a President Nixon was, at least he had some shred of decency. Our politics nowadays are just fucked. Yes, even Nixon showed much more grace and humanity than our recently deposed despot wannabe. Nixon was actually a pretty great statesman and maintained a fairly well-respected public persona in his day. And he had a lot of successes in his first term in office. It's just that his duplicitous bullshit has rightfully overshadowed that legacy.